This is video 1 of week 7, and this is the last week of the course, hence the crying llama. And this is the second one on the relationship between multilingualism and cognition. So as an introduction, let's just recall that in the 1920s, there were tests that revealed that bilinguals had lower IQ than monolingualism. Even it was said that bilingualism depressed intelligence, and remember that bilinguals are at danger of mental retardation even. These were the studies on Welsh and English bilinguals versus English monolinguals, and the ones on new immigrants in Canada. Now, recently, however, we have the other side of the spectrum of possible conclusions, which is that bilingualism has been considered a candidate for an experience that propels children's intelligence into a new stratum. So parents are now recommended to teach a second language or a third language to their children, the same way that they are recommended and were recommended to encourage them to play an instrument or to play music, special classical music to them, or to make them practice a sport, as to give them a head start to propel them into this higher potentiality that all parents want for their children. Probably both approaches are not quite right about the conclusion whether multilingualism is bad for you or whether it's good for you. So we need to look into it a little closer. Now, a note of caution is that the recipient of these educational dictates of today about making your child more intelligent by teaching them a second language, the recipients are this privileged sector of the population in which they have extra resources, extra time even, and they can dedicate those extra resources and time to the education of their children. So no small part of the underlying motivation for the recommendation is to perpetrate that privilege. Also, no small part of the underlying motivation for that is to to make them buy products that are being produced in the industry of second language or additional language learning. Okay, now it goes largely unnoticed that a large portion of children who are not privileged routinely learn other languages and are multilinguals simply because of the situation in which they live, not for reasons of cultural nicety, but because of the background on immigration, oppression, or displacement. And nobody tells you, look, make your child an immigrant, make your child a refugee or a displaced person so that you would increase their intelligence because they will be multilingual as a result. And nobody tells you that these people who find themselves in this situation, or these children who find themselves in these situations, are more intelligent just because of these situations, and therefore these situations should be promoted. Okay, so that's a note of caution about what is being said here and to whom. Now, an additional barrier to conducting decisive research on the possible effect that bilingualism has on intelligence is the lack of consensus about what either of these concepts, intelligence or language and multilingualism, refer to. I've already given you enough evidence that there is no agreement of who counts as multilingual. And also there is no agreement among linguistic theorists about what is language and what is intelligence. Either, as I'm going to present to you here. So on the topic of what is intelligence, not only there is no scientific agreement on how to measure intelligence, but that when it has been measured, it hasn't had the best consequences for people's lives. And here I'm following Bialystok's assessment of it when she says that the assumption that intelligence is an attribute of individuals and also that it can be quantified and that tests can reveal the relative position of one person against some hypothetical standard, that idea has been responsible for countless injustices against individuals and dangerous misconceptions about groups. Okay, so be careful, because this is not a small issue. Whenever intelligence is quantified, people are given a label, and on the basis of that label, life consequences ensue. Okay, so this again is a topic that is very important for our lives. Okay, so now when we look at intelligence, there have been several theories that have been proposed, and I'm going to introduce to you here three of them. I'm going to describe them very roughly, so that you at least have an idea of what has been proposed. Okay, the first one is the psychometric approach to intelligence. This is the one that you probably know the best. This is based on that IQ assigned to people on the basis of their abilities on reasoning, analysis, and verbal proficiency. And you can design tests for those specific abilities, and then you can come up with a result in the terms of a number. Okay. The problem is that IQ assignation, both as a construct and as a test, has been very controversial. Not everybody agrees that that's a good measurement, and not everybody agrees that the tests that have been designed to measure it are actually any accurate. For our purposes, this product-oriented approach is based on a rather static conception of intelligence. You are born with a certain IQ, and you might develop it in the best of circumstances or not, but it's not apparent how an experience such as multilingualism versus monolingualism could have any significant change to that capacity. So if you are studying the impact of multilingualism, which is an experience on the intelligence of someone, but intelligence is fixed at birth, it's genetically inherited or something, then this approach is not going to tell you much about the impact of an experience on that. In this case, the impact of being multilingual on intelligence. Okay. Now, an alternative is what is called the componential approach. The componential approach is based on information processing. So how well you identify, analyze your environment, how well you process it, put it in context, and presumably how well you apply that knowledge that you derive to new contexts, right? And intelligence then is measured according to how well individuals deal with environmental changes throughout their lifespan. For example, studies have been made about the cultural adjustment when someone goes to live, for example, to a new place, and they have to adjust culturally. They go through stages, and intelligence is measured about how well they adapt to those stages, and how much meaning they can derive from their new experiences, and how well they adjust to the new situation. In this view, it would not be surprising that childhood bilingualism had an impact on children's intelligence, because it is an experience, and this is a dynamic notion of intelligence. However, it would be difficult to test the idea, because there are no simple measurements for any of the components, not only the bilingual versus monolingual, and even the notion of language itself, but also how do you measure adjustment would not be an easy thing to determine. Moreover, the source of the differences between the well-adapted one and the less well-adjusted people would be largely speculative. We don't know whether people become better adjusted because they have more friends, and how multilingualism might have impacted that, or the other way around, right? They have more friends because they are better adjusted, and things like that is a little bit not too defined, and it's hard to determine how those different components are defined. Okay, an alternative is this conception of intelligence as a mosaic of abilities that are culturally meaningful, because the ones that are not culturally meaningful you don't measure, but you can identify different domains in which different people might manifest better, more talent or more intelligence. Those would be things like the linguistic, the logical mathematical, the musical, the spatial, the bodily, kinesthetic, how good you are at sports, the interpersonal, how good you are at relating and forming attachments to other people, and intrapersonal, how well you are to understand yourself and the psychological inner lives of people. And so once you identify those domains, those dimensions of human life, you can more or less measure how well an individual performs in each one of these domains, and then say, okay, this individual is highly intelligent in logic mathematical abilities or in musical abilities, and so on and so forth, right? So not just one number that encompasses all, but more domain-specific intelligences. Now, this theory of the multiple intelligences minimizes interactions among the domains. So only when you study the relationship between multilingualism, for example, and any of those domains, you are expected to find only very local effects of that interaction, right? For example, it would be in the case of linguistic intelligence, maybe because we are dealing with multilingualism. So with that you would have an impact, you would have an effect. Okay. Now, so what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that none of these views alone provides a satisfactory definition for intelligence, nor for the interaction between linguistic and other processes that might underlie an account of how bilingualism influences children's developing intelligence. Okay, so the source of intellectual differences between monolinguals and bilinguals must be pitched at some basic cognitive function that is common across forms of thought. This is a conclusion that Bialystok already points out in her 2001 work, but I think it still holds today, right? So we cannot look at an impact of intelligence, impact of multilingualism on intelligence as a whole, but maybe we should look at the basic cognitive functions of the mind, and then kind of dissect whether being multilingual gives you an edge. For example, remember when we were talking in the experiments last week about control analysis, those would be basic cognitive functions, and it might be that being multilingual has an impact on your ability to deal with those, to implement those. Now, the impact of such an effect would be seen in a range of cognitive activities rather than one domain, such as the verbal domain. Okay, so when you make tests on some activities, on some performances that are targeted as for a given cognitive function, it might be that that's where you see the impact of being multilingual. Because it affects that specific cognitive ability that underlies the cognitive activity that you are targeting. Okay, so let's go to the next video to see an example of what those cognitive activities might be or have been proposed in the literature.